Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome to the deep dive. You know the Truman Doctrine, right? Vaguely. Okay, well, we get ready to go beyond the textbook today. The Truman Doctrine. You send over your notes, some articles, even a podcast episode about it. Looks like you're ready for a deep dive.
Absolutely. And that's key with the Truman Doctrine. It's one of those historical hinge points. I mean, we're still feeling the ripple effects today.
No kidding. Okay, so 1947, World War II is over, but things aren't exactly sunshine and roses, are they? What's the scene in Europe? Paint us a picture.
Well, just imagine a whole continent in ruins trying to rebuild. Economies are just gone, and there's this massive power vacuum.
Yeah, because the British Empire is pretty much spent, right?
Exactly. They're done. They can't hold on to everything, and that's where things get really, really interesting.
Because the Soviet Union's ready to, step in and take over.
Precisely. They're already expanding their influence all over Eastern Europe in places like Greece and Turkey, which are strategically vital, incredibly vulnerable at that moment. Greece and Turkey are where Truman's big idea. Well, it's where it gets real.
So Truman gives a speech, and it becomes a pretty famous speech. What's the core message? The thing that becomes the Truman Doctrine.
It's a bold statement. I mean, he's essentially drawing a line in the sand. The U.S., Truman declares, will support any free people resisting communist pressure.
Free people? Okay, so, pay attention to that phrase, right? Free peoples. It's doing some work there.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about, stopping communism. It's about promoting, well, you could say the American way. Or
exactly. It's like, this is where that whole domino theory thing starts, isn't it?
Yes. The fear that if one nation falls to communism, then another one's going to go, and then another one. And honestly, whether or not that was really going to happen, it becomes this, driving force in U.S. foreign policy for decades. You know what I mean?
Korea, Vietnam.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all shaped by this core idea from the Truman Doctrine.
Okay, so Truman's Doctrine, it's one thing to make a speech, right? But how does it actually, play out?
Well, Truman knew he needed more than just a policy, right? I mean, he had to capture the imagination, frame the stakes in a way that resonated with people. That's where his speech gets really interesting.
And we can't forget about the Marshall Plan.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the Truman Doctrine's less famous but way richer sibling, billions of dollars to rebuild Europe. It sounds like a pretty big carrot to go along with that stick.
It is. It's a masterclass in strategic generosity. On the surface, it's like, hey, let's be humanitarian, help these war-torn nations rebuild. But it cleverly ties Western Europe's recovery to the U.S., creating this, well, you could call if an economic alliance. And that alliance directly countered Soviet influence in the East.
So it's not just about stopping communism. It's about, winning hearts and minds, right, with prosperity.
Yeah, exactly. It's showing that the American way, free markets, democratic institutions, it's the path to a brighter future.
So we've got this, two-pronged strategy, right? Contain communism, but then also showcase the American way as this, better alternative. But how do you actually make that argument? You sent us this excerpt from Truman's speech, and it's the part where he talks about the world facing a choice between, and I'm quoting here, alternative ways of life.
Yeah, that's the part that always gets me too. It's like, he could have just given a dry policy speech, but this is different. It's almost philosophical.
Right, he's going way beyond just saying, hey, the Soviet Union is a rival. It's deeper than that.
Yeah, he's basically saying they're the opposite of us. It's America versus, well, whatever he sees as the opposite of everything good, and those are high stakes.
And it's powerful, right? Coming right after World War II.
Yeah.
I mean, people had just seen what happens when a bad ideology takes over.
Exactly. The world was like, okay, we just dealt with fascism. We don't want to deal with another one.
So in a way, it's like this one speech, the Truman Doctrine. It's like the foundation for the entire Cold War.
Right. Which is wild. It's not a declared war, but everything changes. I mean, this rivalry between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, it impacts the whole globe for decades.
Talk about unintended consequences, right? So was this all Truman, or was this, destined to happen anyway?
Well, that's where all these different historical interpretations come in, right? And thankfully, you sent over that podcast episode because it does a really good job of breaking them down. First, you've got your classic Orthodox view. They see Truman as the hero. He stood up to the Soviets when it really mattered and saved the day, right?
Right. And then you've got the revisionists.
Yeah, the revisionists are like, hold on, let's not get ahead of ourselves. They argue it was more about U.S. interests, maybe even intentionally making the Cold War worse so America could be more powerful.
And then somewhere in the middle, you've got, the the post-revisionists,
Mm.
trying to find that middle ground. Maybe both sides share some blame? Things got out of hand.
No. Oh, yeah, and we can't forget about the realists. For them, it's all just a big chess game, you know? Forget ideologies. It's all about geopolitics. Like, who controls what? Who has the most influence? They'd say the Truman Doctrine. It wasn't about good versus evil. It was about power, just strategic maneuvering on a massive scale.
It's really wild to see how different people can look at the same event in totally different ways.
That's what makes studying history so interesting, right? It's not like math where there's always one right answer. You have to look at everything, all the different sides.
So, to everyone listening, which one of those perspectives makes the most sense to you? There's no right or wrong answer. It's all about, engaging with the material, right?
Absolutely. And as long as we're talking about engaging with the material, we should definitely talk about the legacy of the Truman Doctrine, right? I mean, the Cold War is over, but...
Well, a lot of those ideas from his speech are still relevant.
You mean, like, the idea that America should be promoting democracy around the world, even if it means getting involved in other countries' business? Exactly. You can't deny that the Truman Doctrine casts a long shadow. Think about U.S. involvement in places like Korea, Vietnam, even the Middle East. We're still debating this stuff today. Like, should America be the world's police for democracy? It all goes back to that speech.
It really makes you realize that history isn't just dates and names and stuff. It's about us. It's still happening right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all those questions the Truman Doctrine brought up, like, when should we get involved in other countries' business? How much power is too much? And can you really force democracy on someone? Those are all still so relevant.
You know, in a way, the Truman Doctrine is it's like a prism. You look through it and you see all these different sides of history. It makes you think about America's place in the world, about, even these big philosophical questions, about power and what's right.
It's a great way to put it. And honestly, it makes you wonder, like, what would Truman think about everything that's happened since? You know, would he say his doctrine worked? Would he want us to deal with today's problems the same way? Or would he be totally shocked by how different the world is now?
Man, I wish we could bring him back and ask him. But I guess all we can do is try to learn from what happened, understand why Truman made the choices he did, really get a feel for how complicated his legacy is.
Well said. And that's what makes all this whole deep dive. It's what makes it so fascinating. History, it isn't just about memorizing a bunch of names and dates, right? Yeah. It's about using history to understand why things are the way they are now. And maybe even to, help us make better decisions in the future.
So if you're listening to this, keep digging into those sources you sent us. But don't stop at just the what. Go deeper. Think about the why and the how.
Exactly. Because here's the thing, right? Those big questions from the Truman era about America's role in the world, about democracy, about when we should intervene, we're still having those same arguments. Those questions are still shaping everything that happens in the world today.
And who knows? Maybe by looking back at this one moment in time, at this one speech, at this one decision, to say this is where we draw the line. Maybe we can use that to figure out how to create a future where we don't have to draw those lines anymore.
That's a powerful thought.
It is, isn't it?
Right.
Because history isn't just something that happened a long time ago. It's happening now. It's all of us.
Well said.
So to everyone listening, keep those deep dive conversations going. Keep learning. Keep asking those tough questions. This is how we figure it all out, right?
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.